I'm a 32-year-old freelance IT specialist, and my job often takes me to different parts of the world. This time, it's Seattle, a business trip for a few days. I stayed at a hotel called Echo, located right in the city center, an old but beautifully renovated boutique hotel. I immediately liked its atmosphere: high ceilings, dark wood, elegant furniture. It had a certain calm and quiet that I so lacked in my busy life. The first night was great. I slept like a baby, enjoying the silence. After a noisy day, however, everything changed on the second night. At first, it was a barely audible whisper coming from the empty room across the hall. Then I heard footsteps in the hallway, though my phone's camera, pointed at the door, recorded no movement. One time, returning from a conference, I found my laptop closed, even though I'd left it open, and a pen that was on the nightstand ended up on the floor. I chalked it up to my absent-mindedness or just being tired, but the feeling of a constant presence, when no one else was around, grew stronger. It was like someone was breathing down my neck, even though I was alone in the room. One late evening, as I went down for coffee, I met the night porter. He was an old man with deep wrinkles and a gaze that seemed to see much more than ordinary people. Striking up a conversation, cautiously asked about the hotel's history. His eyes had a strange glint. He said that the Echo Hotel once had a different name, and decades ago a terrible tragedy occurred there. A series of disappearances, he said in a hoarse voice. People just vanished from their rooms without a trace. Some say it was a mass suicide, others that they were abducted. But one thing is certain: these souls, they are stuck here. Initially, like a true skeptic, I chuckled, but the more time I spent in the hotel, the more my convictions wavered. The whispers grew louder. Sometimes I could even make out individual words, something like a plea or an entreaty. Objects in the room began not just to shift, but to fall off shelves. One night I woke up to someone touching my hand. I abruptly sat up in bed, but there was no one in the room, only cold air and a feeling as if something had just passed through me. Then the visions began. I saw blurry silhouettes of people wandering the hallways or standing by my bed, their faces distorted by fear and despair. They didn't try to harm me, but their pain was so palpable that it truly unnerved me. On the third night, almost sleepless, exhausted by the constant presence and fear, I felt something pulling me towards an old writing desk in the corner of my room. Beneath it, near one of the legs, I noticed a barely visible crack. I felt something there, and pulled out an old, yellow diary. The cover was made of worn leather, and inside, written in faded ink, was the journal of a young hotel maid who worked there during those tragic times. She described her fears, strange sounds, and then her own observations of how despairing people committed suicide, convinced it was the only way to release themselves from unspeakable pain. The last entries were written in uneven handwriting, and they spoke of how the light had disappeared, and the only way to find peace was to leave everything behind, dissolve into darkness. But one entry stood out: the key to liberation is in the truth, spoken aloud. In accepting their pain, I understood that this was the key. I didn't know why it had to be me, a skeptic accustomed to logic and code, who had to do this. But I felt it was my responsibility. Despite my fear, I began to read aloud the last pages of the diary, uttering the names that were mentioned, acknowledging their pain and their despair. I spoke about their suffering ending, that they could find peace. I said it with all the sincerity I was capable of. Gradually, with each word spoken, the cold air in the room began to warm. The whispers faded, the shadows stopped moving. The feeling of presence that had so weighed on me disappeared. There was complete, absolute silence. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the armchair, watching the dawn break. As the first rays of sun touched the horizon, I felt a strange relief, as if a heavy burden had lifted from my shoulders. I quickly packed my things and left the Echo Hotel. The smell of coffee in the morning was surprisingly pleasant, and the people on the street seemed bright and alive. I had witnessed something real, something that defied logic, and something that, I hope, I managed to complete. The Echo Hotel was no longer a place of suffering, but just an old boutique hotel in downtown Seattle.